What's up, interpreters? My name is Jim Buchholz, and I'm the director of Schmeeckle Reserve, which is a natural area at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point.
What's up, interpreters? This is Song. I'm your NAI Events and Engagement Manager.
What is up, interpreters? I am Paul Caputo, NAI Executive Director. So pleased to be talking to Jim. Jim, good morning. How are you doing?
Good, I'm great. How are you guys doing?
Doing really, really well. I say it's great to be talking to you. We go way back, more than 20 years. You're one of the first NAI members I ever met after I started with the organization way back in 2002. We were just chatting before we got started here. Your first NAI conference was before I started. It was in 1998. One of the things I remember about those early conferences with you were, you'll have to correct me on the official name for this, but the sessions that you did at the NAI conference on the Interpretive Signage Olympics. What were they called? What were those sessions called?
The Wayside Olympics, yeah.
The Wayside Olympics. My background is in graphic design. I was hired as NAI's graphic designer back then. So you were speaking my language, right? I was interested in the exhibit side of things. How did you get involved in that side of interpretation? Where was your Wayside interest born of?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll have to go back a long ways to get there. So I grew up in the state park system of Wisconsin, actually. My dad was a superintendent at several state parks while I was growing up. So I was one of those park brats, I guess. And in third grade, we went to Kohler-Andrews State Park, which is along Lake Michigan, near Sheboygan in Wisconsin. We actually lived inside the park. So Lake Michigan was just a quarter-mile walk away. And it was about that time that I saw what the naturalist was doing in the nature center, the Sanderling Nature Center that was there at the park. I thought, gosh, that seems like a really cool job. You get to tell people about nature, you get to lead them around the parks, and I was hooked ever since that time. There was a wood shed that was in our backyard that hadn't been used for many years. And so I took all the wood out of the woodshed and started to build my first nature center. I called it the Buchholz Nature Center. It had little exhibits of rocks and feathers and beach glass and everything else, and people could come in and sign their names. So that's really where I got started, and I started to lead my first interpretive programs when I was in fifth grade, and we had a kids hike for kids who were staying at the campground. It would show them some neat things that were along the nature trails there. So always had this passion for nature and also teaching that to others. Again, my dad was a superintendent of parks. My mom was a teacher, so I kind of blended those two things together. And when I started looking for colleges to go to, I ended up going to the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. My dad had gone there for natural resources before, and I learned there was actually a profession called interpretation. I had never heard of anything like that before. So it was very exciting that there was actually a major and a program that I could go into where I could follow my passion. I went through that program, and under the teaching of Ron Zimmerman and Mike Gross, who led the interpretation program there, both fellows of NAI as well, and the authors of the Interpreter's Handbook series. They kind of took me under their wings. So when I graduated in 2000, I became the graduate assistant at Schmeeckle Reserve and started to work with them on interpretive projects, interpretive planning projects. And that's where I really first started getting introduced to interpretive signage and interpretive planning and helping other agencies and organizations to tell their story through interpretation.
So, Jim, what is like your regular work week look like as director of Schmeeckle Reserve?
There is no regular work week, I can tell you that. Just like most of us, it's kind of putting out any fire that happens to arrive. But yeah, so it's a lot of what you would imagine as administrative work, but we're in a really unique situation. So Schmeeckle Reserve is a 280-acre natural area on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. So I'm a university employee. And we have about 20 to 30 employees, but almost all of them are students. And so it's a lot of training of students every year to come in, and they do everything from running our front desk area, selling things in the gift shop, to maintaining trails, maintaining the facilities, to restoring habitats, those types of things. And so we're working a lot with the student crew on different kinds of projects that really enhance the natural area. We're open to the public, but we're also heavily used by different colleges, students, especially in the College of Natural Resources. So the College of Natural Resources at UW-Stevens Point is one of the largest undergraduate College of Natural Resources in the country. And we also have a very strong environmental education and interpretation program as well. One of the few programs that actually has interpretation in the title. And so I was very involved, early on with Ron and Mike when they were developing the interpretation courses. I helped to teach those and help to develop some of those courses. Now we work real closely with Dr. Chris McCart, who is the faculty member in charge of the environmental interpretation program, also a very active NAI member as well. So we're still very much involved in helping to lead the interpretation curriculum at UW-Stevens Point. We work with students in several different classes. There's a class in interpretive media where they're actually learning how to plan, design, and also fabricate different types of media, such as brochures and signs and newsletters and posters, those kinds of things. And then they have a capstone experience called the Practicum Environmental Education and Interpretation. Half of that takes place here at Schmeeckle Reserve. Half of it takes place at our sister field station called the Central Wisconsin Environmental Station. At SWES, Central Wisconsin Environmental Station, they learn kind of the environmental education portion of the job. They're working with school groups that are coming in every day in kind of a camp setting. Here at Schmeeckle, we have them focus on the interpretation aspects of the program. So they plan and they develop their own presentations for the community. The public is able to come in and attend those programs. And then they also work on different kinds of interpretive media projects as well. So we have a small nature trail that kind of loops around the visitor center area. And every semester they develop new signs for that trail based on a specific theme. So they're really taking what they learned in their oral interpretation class and their interpretive media class, and then putting it to practice when they get to the capstone practicum.
So your work centers around interpretive planning, and I know that you have a focus on media, and that's where the Wayside Olympics come from.
Yeah.
In the process of interpretive planning, what is the relationship between, and I realize this is a big question, but what is the relationship between the first person or the in-person frontline interpretation that's happening and the signage and the wayside exhibits? How closely do those two aspects of interpretation need to work with each other at a successful interpretive site?
Oh, I think they're both definitely necessary and they both need to work together. It's those in-person experiences are the really meaningful ones that people remember. When I think back in my own childhood, one of my first experiences with interpretation was at a program where we were singing a funny beaver song. It was that personal interaction. It was something that was humorous, and it's something that I remembered my entire life. And I think all of us can think back on some type of experience we've had at a zoo or a park or an aquarium, and we can think about that personal experience we had with a really good interpreter that connected us to those resources. But as we know, just in terms of practicality, it's expensive to have interpreters. An interpreter can't be there 24 hours. Well, sometimes it feels like we're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but an interpreter can't be there all the time to provide those kinds of experiences. And that's where media comes in. So when we talk about signs, one of the advantages to having wayside exhibits or interpretive signs is that they're always on duty. They're there 24/7. They're always there to answer questions that visitors might have about the resource, and they always have that opportunity to help visitors find those meanings that they're looking for. So I don't think media can ever be as strong as what a professional in-person interpreter could be, but it's definitely necessary to fill in those gaps when we don't have an interpreter there all the time, or if there's visitors that don't feel comfortable being part of an interpretive group as well. We have to think about the whole diversity of audiences. And when we're doing interpretive planning, that's one of the main categories that we're looking at is the audiences and the diversity of audiences and how do you connect with all those different kinds of groups. And it's not always just one thing. It's not just the in-person. It's not just signs. It's not just newsletters or apps or all the different kinds of things that we could do, but it's that collection of interpretive media and programming that really allows us to reach the greatest diversity of audiences.
Jim, you really have such an opportunity at Stevens Point. You have students studying to become interpreters, environmental education. You have your own park and nature preserves and centers. How do you take all of that all of that data and information and use it into interpretive planning? I mean, you've got, this holistic approach into planning, but what are like some tips that you can provide to somebody who's like, I need to do some interpretive planning, because you've got this vast visitor experience, right? That starts with public, also the students, also the faculty.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, also just kind of the academic side. So how do you roll all that together, and what are some tips you can speak to?
That's a great question and a challenging question as well. One thing when we started interpretive planning projects, so we also lead a small interpretive consulting group where we're helping agencies and organizations to tell their stories through interpretation. And one of the first things we understand and we talk to the client about is that every planning process is unique. Every planning process has different needs. Every planning process has different desires of what they want to accomplish. And so it's hard to provide a formula, for what they might be looking for. Tomorrow, we're going to be meeting with the Portage County Historical Society, we're in Portage County. So they're going to be embarking on their own interpretive master plan. And that's very exciting for us to be able to work with some groups that are local. Usually we're working in other states, because for some reason people don't like to hire you if you're in your own state. So we're going to be working with a local organization that's really looking at how can they expand their story and send it to other people as well. And so we're looking forward to that. But we do kind of follow some basic principles as we develop these interpretive plans. And we do have examples on our website too. So if anyone is interested in seeing how we go about interpretive planning, and every planner does it a little bit different, but you're definitely welcome to go to our website, just Google Schmeeckle Reserve and interpretive planning, and you can see some of the plans that we've worked on. But we kind of use what we call the planning triangle when we're dealing with planning. One of those components is the why, the mission or the goals of the agency or the organization. That definitely drives what kind of stories you're going to tell or what kinds of things you want to share. The second, we already talked about a little bit, is the audience. What kind of audience, who is the audience that you're looking to bring in? Who is the audience that is already coming to your site? Who are the audiences that you want to target with your messaging that you're working with? The third component are the resources. The reason that people are coming to your site are to see these tangible resources, the landscape or I keep looking at the background Paul has here of the ocean and the dunes and the grasses, or at a zoo, it might be the animals, or at an aquarium. At a cultural site, it could be the historic ruins that might be there or the artifacts. And so people are coming to see those different kinds of resources. What are the resources that you have? And then what are the stories behind those resources? And then, kind of in the middle of that is the how, the why, the when. How do you actually tell those stories? And we use themes as a framework, which basically brings together these main ideas. And then you use those themes to develop your different kinds of interpretive communications. So if you look at one of our plans, one chapter will be the why, the mission, the goals, the purpose. One chapter will be the audience. Any studies that might have been done. We may conduct studies as part of the planning process to see who's coming to our sites. The third would be the resources. So we do a resource inventory. What are the different resources of a site? What are the stories that are associated with those resources? Then there's a whole chapter on themes and messages. So we talk about what are the themes that kind of tie together all these diverse stories, the one big theme. What are some of the sub-themes that we can tell through interpretation? And then we have interpretive recommendations, or the media or the programs. So that could include the in-person programming, that might make the most sense for your limited interpretive staff time to connect with the visitors. What kinds of media is going to be most effective? Are signs the right solution? It's not always the right solution. Sometimes a sign can be a deterrent on the landscape rather than provide that enrichment that you're hoping for people to see. It may be an app, that you're able to use, or it might be a brochure, or it might be artwork. Sometimes you don't even need the words, the text, just the pictures themselves, or a sculpture or something helps to tell those different kinds of stories. So every site is really unique, but as you're looking at basic planning, by looking at that planning triangle, the why, the who, and the what, that kind of gives us a foundation for then building what those stories are that are most appropriate for the site.
You identify signs, trails, and wayside exhibits, to coin a phrase. as one of the final steps of the planning process. I imagine that you often work with clients who come into the process feeling like they've already reached that point. Like, we want to develop signs for our nature center, and you have to pull back and say, wait, there's a whole process that we have to go through to get there. I am going to jump right ahead to that part of the plan. The book Signs, Trails, and Wayside Exhibits was published in 2006, almost 2 decades ago. If you were writing that book now, how different would it be? What changes have happened to that aspect of interpretation in the 2 decades since that book was published?
Yeah, we talk about this quite a bit with different clients and classes. And quite honestly, the base, the foundations, the fundamentals of that book are still very pertinent today. And I think a lot of times we kind of get, or some people get caught up in all the new stuff that's happening. We have these integrated apps now that we can work with, and virtual reality or augmented reality, or some of the new technologies. And what we find is that a lot of people still go back to those basics. It's the signs that tell you what they're seeing at that place where people are gathering. It's the brochure that you're handed when you go into a National Park Service site and you use it as the map, and you kind of discover, what's the meaning of this park that I'm going into. So, I mean, definitely there are things that we would change in the book. There's a whole series that talks about the different types of sign materials, for example, the cost of those sign materials, the durability of those signs materials. Those materials change every year. And when you go to the NAI conferences and you talk to the vendors, you see the new techniques that they're coming out with. You see the new durability that they're bringing out, the new kinds of products. So there's a lot of different kinds of materials, or at least the same kind of materials that have been enhanced over the years. So that would definitely change with things. I think maybe some of the bigger changes would be within the planning process. I see a lot more today of bringing in diverse audiences to help you with that planning process. And I guess it's something we've always tried to do, but more and more so, bringing in diverse voices into those signs is just extremely important. At the last NAI conference, I went to several amazing sessions where people were talking exactly about that, bringing in those diverse voices as you're trying to develop this interpretation as well. And so I think really focusing on who is going to be reading this interpretive media, who's going to be experiencing this media. If we're trying to connect with those other kind of audiences, what are those audiences looking for, rather than just what we as interpreters say, hey, we're professionals, here's what I'm going to throw onto a sign panel. We know that that's not the right way of doing that. And, planning is about the process of consensus development, of bringing lots of different voices in and coming up with a product that a lot of people can say, yes, I understand that, I see how that works.
So Jim, talking about your presentation, Wayside Olympics, and also it's not a presentation. It is the most interactive. You and I were texting, hey Song, can I move around these tables out in the hall? Hey Song, do you think we can go out in the hall? Do you think we're going to disturb any of the other presenters in the hallway? It is a highly interactive session. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how did you come up with that, and why the need for so much interaction?
Sure. And I always feel bad for Song when we ever have a conference and I have to ask, is it okay to disturb others? And
Oh, I just know now, if your session gets accepted, to just put you in the corner, quote unquote, corner somewhere, and then you're good. I don't have to worry
that's
about
good.
you.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. The worst one was when we brought signs in and we did vandalism on them. That was the
Yeah.
one that was very noisy. Gave everybody bricks and lighters and paintbrushes and markers and said, vandalize away, and then shut up. So that was a noisy one for sure. But the Wayside Olympics actually came from when Mike Gross and Ron Zimmerwin were first teaching the interpretation courses. They were trying to find ways to engage students in the design of signs. And so, as we work with students, we talk about some of these basic design principles, whether it's contrast or balance or white space or, too many words, telling the story through pictures, the 333 rule, using message hierarchy. And so we go through all these different ideas of what makes good signs. But then how do we really get students involved with, identifying what is a good sign or what is a sign that isn't as good? And so we have this idea called fraction of selection. Fraction of selection is expectation of reward over effort required. So if it looks like if a sign looks like it'll be very rewarding to read, if it looks like it's not going to take much work, then it has a high fraction of selection. If it doesn't look very rewarding to you, and if it looks like it's going to take a lot of effort, like there's a lot of words I got to get through to get it to anything, you're probably not going to read that sign. And so the idea was, let's show students different pictures of signs and then let them vote on those signs. And that kind of evolved then into, wouldn't this be fun to do at a professional interpreters conference as well? And so this past, I think 2 years ago, we did another session of Wayside Olympics. We kind of bring it back every few years. And we reach out to the NAI community and say, please send us pictures of signs that you've either created or that are part of your sites or that you've taken pictures of and you just thought were kind of interesting. We'll bring them together and we'll let professional interpreters judge them. And so we create the Wayside Olympics, which includes the Wayside Olympic theme, Olympic fanfare music, and we have people that dress up. And we have torches that they run into the room with and light the main torch to start the Olympic Games. There's rules that take place. And then we have everybody with, it used to be little clickers that they would use, but now everybody can use their smartphones, which is nice. And so you can connect in, and then we give them the idea of fraction of selection. This is what we're looking at. We show a picture of our first contestant, and everybody decides what that fraction of selection is on a scale of 1 to 10. And then it averages everything together. And so by the end, we go through probably 15 or 20 signs. By the end, we have what is the highest rated sign and why is that? And throughout the whole presentation, we then talk about what are these different basic design impacts. Why didn't you like this sign? Oh, too many words, not enough pictures. Okay, well, that's one of the basic design elements is tell your story visually. Why didn't you like this one? Oh, there's just too many words all the same size. Well, you have to have a message hierarchy, right? And so it's an interesting way to learn. We found we could really connect with students, and hopefully we can also connect with professional interpreters as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, that Olympic theme song has cost us thousands of dollars of ASCAP fees over the years. So it's
we always have a disclaimer at the beginning from our lawyers that no permission whatsoever to use the Olympic name nor the
Well, Jim, this has really been fun, and it's so great to catch up and actually have a moment to chat with you about the work that you do. I mean, we've crossed paths so many times, but to have a conversation like this is really fun for me. Where can folks go learn about the Schmeeckle Reserve and any of the other work that you're doing out there?
Yeah, most definitely. So and Schmeeckle is a hard word to spell, and it's a very hard word to say. We've heard everything from Schmeckle to Schmeeckle to Schmeckle to whatever else. So Schmeeckle, it's a good German name. Fred Schmeeckle was one of the people that created the first conservation education majors in the entire country here at UW-Stevens Point. So connects directly to our fields of environmental education and interpretation as well, which is pretty interesting. But if people are interested in learning more about Schmeeckle Reserve and some of the consulting work that we do, they can go to www.uwsp.edu/Schmeeckle, and Schmeeckle is spelled SCHMEECKLE. It's often that second C that people miss in the process.
We'll have that spelled out in the show notes, so anyone who wants to go double check their spelling can find that in the show notes of this episode. So
fantastic.
And interpreters?
That's what's up.
What's up?